And welcome. It is 12 o'clock, so let's start. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this webinar on loneliness among older adults, research and practice and implications for practice in the Nordic region. My name is Louise Söderberg, and I work at the Nordic Welfare Centre, and we're organizing this webinar in collaboration with Dalarna University and Karolinska Institutet. If you're watching this live, you are one of 230 or even more people registered for this webinar. You represent municipalities and regions, authorities and ministries, as well as research and a variety of organizations. A warm welcome to you all. One of the political priorities of the Nordic Council of Ministers is that no one should struggle with involuntary loneliness. In 2020, the Nordic Council of Ministers published a research overview by Lena Dahlberg from Dalarna University and Karin Lennartsson from Karolinska Institutet. And the report showed clearly that we still have some way to go in understanding loneliness among older adults, the risk factors, and how we also can work towards alleviating and counteracting the feeling of loneliness. Lena Dahlberg and Karin Lennartsson were part of a Nordic expert group coordinated by the Nordic Welfare Centre, together with, among others, Marja Aartsen from Oslo Met. And Marja Aartsen will be present with us here today and present some of her new research. Marja Aartsen was also one of the authors of a research review from early 2023 on the impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic on social isolation and loneliness. And it showed quite clearly that, especially in the later stages of the pandemic, that it was the oldest old and people living in nursing homes who suffered the most. Today, in 2025, the WHO recently launched a flagship report on, from the Global Commission on Social Connection, urging policymakers, researchers, and all sectors basically to treat social health on equal par as physical and mental health. And in a Nordic context, the Nordic Network for Age-friendly Cities and Communities, that is coordinated also by the Nordic Welfare Centre, they work diligently and strategically to ensure that indeed older adults don't have to suffer from involuntary loneliness. And also to make sure that they can be included in society and a part of local communities. We will hear more about this work from Berit Rafoss from the Centre for Age-friendly Norway, joining us later today. We will also be joined by Lindgren, from one of the news members in the network from Kristianstad municipality. And lastly, I will mention that here in Sweden, where we are airing from a small island in the middle of Stockholm, that the Public Health Agency has developed the strategy Standing Together, a national strategy to tackle loneliness. So many important steps are being taken towards tackling the issue of loneliness among older adults. And research is a very important part of that. So I'm very pleased to once again bid you all a warm welcome. And I look very much forward to listening to all the interesting presentations we have lined up. And before I give the word to Neda, I will just bring a few household messages. This webinar is being recorded, and the recordings will be available on the YouTube channel of the Nordic Welfare Centre after a bit of time. You will not be visible or audible in the recordings, and neither will the chat. And during the webinar, you can send messages directly to the moderators and presenters. Thank you, and let's go forward with this.
I echo Louise. Welcome, everyone. We're super excited to have you all here with us today. My name is Neda Agahi, and I'm an associate professor at the Aging Research Center at Karolinska Institutet, and I will guide you through today's program. With me, I have Professor Lena Dahlberg, also from the Aging Research Center and from Dalarna University. And Lena is the leader of a research project and a research program about loneliness that we will hear more about today. So let's have a look at the program. We will start with some research presentations, and we're very happy to have some very outstanding Nordic researchers with us today who will present their work on loneliness from different perspectives. And at the end of the program, there will also be some concluding reflections and take-home messages for civil society and for social and health services. I'm sorry. After the second break, we will engage you in some activities, and there will be a Menti with some questions for you. So you can already now start to take these questions with you. We will ask about what was new to you from these presentations and what you will take with you to apply or share in your organization. And if you have any questions for the speakers, as Louise said, feel free to write them in the chat and we will ask them based on the time we have left. Okay then, so let's get started. I give the word to you now, Lena, and you will present these projects and also give us an overview of the concept of loneliness so we're all on the same page.
Thank you. Thank you. So in this webinar, we're going to present findings from 2 research projects. The first is called Causes and Actions of Late Life Loneliness, and it's funded by the Kamprad Family Foundation. And this is done in collaboration between Dalarna University and Karolinska Institutet. And in this project, we aim to identify risk factors for loneliness. So for example, we have looked at the importance of quality and quantity in social relationships. Secondly, we examined experience of loneliness. So it's older people's own accounts of how they experience loneliness and what they do to alleviate loneliness. Finally, we aim to identify successful actions to alleviate loneliness. And we focused on identifying key components of interventions to reduce loneliness. So today, myself and my colleagues, Magdalena and Jerry, will present findings from this project. We will also present findings from the research program on aging, loneliness and mental health, which is funded by the Swedish Research Council for Health, Working Life and Welfare, Forte. This is also a collaboration between Karolinska Institutet and Dalarna University. This program has 4 work packages. In the first one, we identify risk factors and consequences of loneliness. So, for example, we look at the causal association between loneliness and mental health. We also want to enhance the understanding of loneliness and how to assess loneliness. And this is based on interviews with older people on how they experience loneliness, and it will lead to the development of an instrument to assess loneliness, which can be used by practitioners in care contexts. Thirdly, we want to focus on how to identify and address loneliness in care contexts, and we will develop a course for care professionals. And finally, we explore what can be done to enhance the recognition and response to loneliness. For example, how to communicate and collaborate across services and how this can be improved. I will present some findings from work package 1 in this introduction, and Stefan will present findings specifically focusing on loneliness and mental health. We have academic and stakeholder reference groups linked to both these projects. Members of these groups are contributing to today's program. We will hear Marja and Elisa, who are part of the academic reference groups, and Marie-Louise and Emma are linked to the stakeholder group. But before we present any findings, I would like to introduce the concept of loneliness. So, because there are several related concepts. So first you have more objective concepts, social isolation and living alone, where social isolation is about really being alone. So you have few social contacts, you meet people rarely, a low level of social activity. Whereas living alone is about being single, it's more about household composition. And then you have the subjective experiences. And that can be positive or neutral. It's about generally a positive feeling about feeling alone, solitude. But when we talk about the negative feeling of being alone, That's when we talk about loneliness in research. So in research, when we talk about loneliness, it's the negative feeling that we mean. And a definition that we often see is that loneliness is a result of a discrepancy between one's desired and achieved levels of social relations. So in one way or another, the relations are unsatisfactory, and it can be in terms of quantity, how many friends you have, how often you meet, but it can also be about quality of the relationships. So loneliness is a quite complex phenomenon, and it can mean different things to different people. We can see it as different dimensions of loneliness, so social, emotional, and existential. Social loneliness is the response to not belonging to a group, not having a large group of friends that you feel part of. Emotional is more about not having that close friend, someone you really trust, like a partner or a friend or a sibling, for example. Existential loneliness has less to do with social relations and more to do about feeling separated from others and the world. So how common is loneliness? In our research, we have analyzed data from a national survey called SWEOLD, which covers people who are aged 77 years or older and living in Sweden. And we asked the question, are you ever bothered by feelings of loneliness? And this survey started in 1992, and the last and most recent data collection wave was done in 2021. And as you can see, it's a rather stable trend. Quite contrary to the impression one might get from media, there's not an increase in loneliness. So it's quite stable, and about 12% experience loneliness often or nearly always. And then just over 20% experience loneliness seldom, but the vast majority almost never feel bothered by feelings of loneliness. Here, it's important to remember that while we see a stable trend in the proportions of loneliness, there is an increase in the number of people feeling lonely because we have an aging population. The other thing that is important to remember is that loneliness is not only a negative feeling in itself, it also has negative consequences. There is quite a lot of research that have shown that loneliness is associated with poor well-being and with an increase of poor both physical and mental health, and even an increased mortality risk. Here, it should be noted that health is also a risk factor for loneliness if you have poor health. And there is a discussion on this association. It's quite complex and the mechanisms behind them. And Stefan will present some findings about this regarding mental health. We have done a systematic review of longitudinal research on risk factors for loneliness. So that is research when you follow the same individual over time. We included 34 articles in this overview, and these covered 120 risk factors. So it's quite a lot, and therefore I'm sure you understand that a lot of these risk factors are only included in 1, 2, or just a few studies. We grouped the risk factors, and here I've also mentioned the risk factors that were studied in quite a lot of articles and with similar results, as quite consistent result, and this is where we have the stronger evidence. So regarding demographic factors, being a woman and being older increases the risk of loneliness. So loneliness is more common in women and people of higher age. But in most studies, this association is not significant when you take other factors into account. So it's not about being a woman and older per se that increases the risk of loneliness. It's things that come with being a woman and being older. One of those things are social. For example, the loss of a partner. This is more common in women because we live longer and we tend to marry older men. Also having few social contacts or a small network, low social support increases the risk of loneliness. Research on socioeconomic factors, there I haven't written any specific factor because they look at different outcomes. So it can be income, it can be class, it can be education, but generally the research point in the same direction. The worse off you are in terms of socioeconomic status, the higher is the risk of loneliness. There's quite a lot of research on health-related factors, where the strongest evidence is for poor self-perceived health. There's also a lot of research on psychological factors, where we see the strongest evidence for depression and depressive symptoms. So not necessarily a clinically diagnosed depression, but also depressive symptoms. So what we found then was that a lot of research have been done on risk factors, but the evidence for each one is not that strong. So we concluded that there's a broad but shallow evidence. And we also thought, quite surprisingly, some factors were not well researched. So for example, there was very little research comparing different countries and different neighborhoods. And Marja will address this in her presentation. There is also limited research on how conditions earlier in life influences loneliness in later life, what is sometimes talked about as a life course approach to loneliness. And you will hear more about this from Elisa. Another example was that while there is strong evidence for social contacts and networks in terms of quantity, there were very little research that had focused on the quality of social relationships. And that was something we went on and studied in our project. So we looked at how both quality and quantity in different kinds of social relations increased or decreased the risk of loneliness. Marked in green, we found that loneliness was less common in people who had a partner, even if there were conflicts in this relationship. Closeness to children decreased the risk of loneliness, but those who did not have a close relationship with their children or a conflict with their children had an increased risk of loneliness. And finally, social support decreases the risk of loneliness. Overall, we found that quality had a stronger effect, so it was more important for loneliness than quantity in the relationships. Finally, I'm going to say a few words about interventions. So very briefly, to summarize the research in this area, one can say that there's little evidence for the effectiveness of interventions. And where there are effects, they tend to be rather small. And I'm sure there are a lot of explanations to this. Partly, it can be due to that one rarely makes a distinction between different types of loneliness. And sometimes it can be emotional loneliness that is the outcome, but usually, or social, but usually it's just loneliness generally, or even social isolation. The evidence on interventions, even less common is for it to go into the intervention components. So what makes the intervention work? And that is something that Jerry will present findings on later today. And Berit will present how specific initiative, that is age-friendly cities, can contribute to reduced loneliness. So to sum up, around 12% of older adults are bothered by loneliness often or nearly always. This is a stable proportion, but the number of people who are affected is increasing. The risk of loneliness is also greater in specific groups of with people with particular living conditions. And loneliness comes with an increased risk of both physical and mental health problems. And finally, the evidence on interventions is still rather weak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. Now we're all on the same page regarding loneliness, and it will be super nice to start and listen to all the presentations that we have in today's program. The first speaker now is Marja Aartsen, who's a research professor at the Oslo Metropolitan University. So very welcome, Marja.
Thank you. I wanted to start a video, but it's disabled, it says. Ah, no, I can. Sorry. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Can I start already?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I share my screen. So thank you, first of all, Neda and Lena and the Welfare Centre for inviting me to this webinar. I think it's a very, very important topic we talk about today. So it's also very nice to see so many people interested online and following these discussions with which I think is great, is a great well, development in a way, this attention to loneliness. So my presentation in particular will focus a little bit more on how the society or the direct and more wider society influences loneliness. Before I start, I would like to say that part of this presentation is based on a book that is recently published. It's open access, so you can find it on the internet, written by many, many colleagues and edited by me and 2 colleagues. And there are many chapters that are very relevant for my presentation today, but also maybe for you if you want to read a little bit more about this. So one of the most well-known individual risk factors that also Lena already addressed or mentioned was that not living with a partner, having a small social network, and, for example, social inactivity or low level of social context is increasing the risk of loneliness. So therefore, it's very likely to think, okay, those countries where people are living alone and also where maybe the amount of contact are smaller than other countries, or where it's unusual to gather on the streets, for example, maybe, well, you would expect that there the loneliness is much higher than in other countries where people easily meet on the street, have bigger families, have more focus on visiting each others and having contact. But interestingly is that this is not what we see, actually. It's actually on the contrary. So the countries where most people live alone and opportunities to make social context are limited, for example, that we see in Nordic countries, older people are least lonely. So this is a kind of a paradoxical finding, or at least a puzzling finding, which is also called the loneliness paradox sometimes. So you see it coming back in many, many studies. How can we explain this? And it's true, if you look at the prevalences of loneliness, you see that in the south of Europe, the prevalence rates, the risk of being lonely is much higher than in the north. And so in other words, it is too easy to say this is only based on individual risk factors. We must somehow look at a wider social context to understand this pattern of a high loneliness prevalence in the south. So country variations on loneliness, I have to push myself away now, I can't see. Country variations on loneliness prevalence cannot be explained by individual differences only. So we must take the local and national environment into account to understand this. And there are fortunately already some studies, although it's very premature. You can see here on the left, the studies are very recent. Most of them are only since 2020. Some are slightly older, but this one study by Meehan, for example, they found clear evidence that the neighborhood is important because the neighborhood can foster social connections that easily provide help, simply because they are living in the neighborhood. It's easy to go and visit your neighbor and do something to help with groceries or do other things. So that's a very logical reason that the neighborhood is important. Also, disadvantaged neighborhoods, for example, neighborhoods where there are no services, where the general practitioner is living in a place which is hard to reach, or if there are very, very few public transport opportunities for public transport, then the chances to feel lonely is higher. But other parts are people who do not feel to belong there where they live and feel they are actually on the wrong place. This is what we sometimes also see in nursing homes, that people feel that they do not belong in this strange environment and therefore feel much lonelier than they would have been in their own house. And then not only the direct neighborhood, so where the people live, but also communities, being part of a group of people that can be in person, but also online. That helps people to provide them a feeling of to belong to something, to belong to a group, to belong to something, which protects against loneliness. At the same time, it's also nice to realize that communities can at the same time also be very exclusionary. If we think, for example, about closed faith communities or these sectarian groups that are really exclusive in the same time. And then if we look at a national level, there is not much, Lena already mentioned this, there is not much there. All we have found indeed already in 1990, that was Marja and Jokela in Finland who noticed, based on cross-national studies, that it was so low in the north and so high in the south, which was counterintuitive for them in that time. And their hypothetical explanation, because they couldn't prove it in that time, their hypothetical explanation was that it has to do with the culture. So the norms for social interactions are maybe much lower in a way in the north. For example, maybe the Nordic people are better in being alone. They are so much bothered than people who have high expectations, that a family comes and visits every day, for example. Other explanations, again, this is a hypothetical explanation because it has not been investigated, is that in the south there are more widowed people or more older people or more female people. So it's the composition of a country. It's a structural explanation in a way. And then again, Liekes and Kemmelmeyer also pointed towards this idea about individualism. So in countries where autonomy is highly valued, it's not, people get less lonely because they are not so, they value in a way being alone. And then Hans and Slagsvold, they pointed also towards living standards and the wealth of a society that is helpful. Frederik and Nyquist and others were pointing towards welfare states provisions that can be helpful to reduce loneliness. Migration is another aspect that in Fokoma and Giurbano have been studied quite a lot. So if there are a lot of people migrating into a country, that might raise this prevalence of loneliness because people might feel not to belong in that country where they live. In a study that I was involved with Grazina Rappoline, we mentioned that trust in other people or trust in the politicians are very important. So if there is low trust, then it increases loneliness. For example, in the post-totalitarian states in the east of Europe, where the people have a lot of mistrust. And then Heu mentioned an interesting one that's called relational mobility. So if you have a lot of agency in a way, if you have a lot of free choice to choose the people you want to have interaction with, then you have more opportunities to reduce loneliness. And then finally, studies are pointing towards climate change or even fear for climate change that can increase loneliness. And then we can think of a lot of other things. For example, wow, how is AI interacting here? What is digitalization doing? The fear of wars or having conspiracies against many things. We all know that it might be related to loneliness, but how precisely, we don't know. So why is it that we know so little about macro-social influences? Well, one is that we just didn't focus at macro level so much. And some people call it a microfication. We have been so much focused on the micro level, on the individual level, that we simply have forgot to look at the macro level. But there's also, and now I summarize a little, it's very much also that the studies, we don't have the right data to do it. Samples may not be representative, so prevalences might be a little bit biased in estimating precisely how many people are lonely. And then we don't have the right methodology to unravel these macro level influences. There are exceptions though. So if you want to read a bit more about that, you can find it partly in the book, but also here, this present publication by Svader and Moraru. And then finally, theories have often been what we call post hoc. So we did not have a theory at forehand, but try to interpret what we see and then come with an explanation which makes it we have explanations. But there's good news here. There's a new generation of loneliness theories coming. And there we very much try to understand loneliness as an integration between macro and micro level. And all have the same sort of basic idea that people, we do not live in a vacuum, but we are surrounded by others or linked to other people. And therefore we are influenced by what happens in their lives or in the wider society. Another assumption is that the wider society can impact loneliness by influencing the resources a person has, or maybe by shaping the expectations that people have about social relations. And also it influences the importance of individual characteristics for loneliness. And therefore later life loneliness finally can also be shaped by events earlier in life course. That's where Elisa will talk about, or even in childhood. So the one of the first who came with this new generation of theories was de Jong, Giert and Tess Reumer. They very much emphasized how macro level influences this gray part, the societal level, sort of shaping our individual expectations, and that in turn has an impact on how important these risk factors are. That's one approach. Another approach I think is very worthwhile is this one, the Dyer model, developed by Oliver Huxford and Fiore from the United States, Oliver Huxford from Germany, where you see there is also what they add to this is this vicious circle. So loneliness in turn influences also again these individual characteristics, and these individual characteristics are also influenced by the context. And then a third model where I was part of the development, you cannot read what's in there, but what you see is these three blocks. It's the societal context, it's the linked lives and the local community, and the micro context that in a way integrate in and have a sort of intersectional impact. So one aspect can reinforce other aspects, and that in turn has an impact on how loneliness develops over the life course. So coming back to the first, how to explain the paradox? Well, I think affluent countries in Europe provide better living conditions and welfare provisions that allow individuals to thrive while shielding them from negative circumstances. Also, better economic circumstances contribute to less loneliness. Digitalization supports integration and there's lower loneliness. Again, there might be a backdraw there, something negative coming there. Higher political trust associated with lower loneliness. And finally, if individualistic norms are valued over collective norms, being alone has less impact. And precisely these points are high in the Nordic countries. So most likely, if we want to understand this paradox, why people, it can be solved or resolved by using these arguments. If you want to read more about this, I can refer or advise or suggest to read these chapters in the book if you want. So summing up, loneliness occurs when there is a disbalance, this nicely explained by Lena, between social relation one has and one wants to have. And the disbalance can be caused by individual factors, losing health, social relationship, losing trust, but also by factors at the neighborhood and the structure and culture of a society. And most likely it's the consequence of all three levels and the interaction between the three. So to conclude, it's within the meso and macro realms that policymakers are best positioned to reduce loneliness. Or is it? And that's the last. I would like to stop here.
Thank you so much, Marja, for this very interesting presentation. I have a question for you here. You were talking about norms, and these norms, of course, can vary across different countries and cultures. How do you view the variation of norms within the Nordic countries, for example, due to migration or like the slight cultural differences? And is this something that we need to consider in our research or when we're developing interventions?
Yes. Thank you. An interesting question, Neda. I'm not so sure if the norms, if there's large variation in norms in the original Nordic people, I would say. I think my expectation is that it is rather similar. But I think what it shows is that so the personal, these norms are very important for personal standards, and loneliness is an extremely subjective concept. So if you do not expect too much from other people, well, then if the family doesn't come and visit you, it's not so bad, and then it's just in line with what you would expect. It's in line with your standards. When it comes to interventions, I'm not so sure if you can, of course, address these personal standards and say maybe you don't have, I mean, thinking about coping strategies, you could tell people that they could maybe lower their expectations. If you cannot change anything else, then maybe you can lower expectations and say, okay, maybe it's not so realistic what you want. If you still want to marry the prince on the white horse, maybe you should adjust your expectations a little bit. Now I'm exaggerating, of course, but there might be something. How migration is related to this? Well, I think of migrating or living in a society that's rather heterogeneous can help people to see that there are different ways to perceive what is happening to you. So you can learn from other groups of people and see them as a positive example. Or at the same time, we could also see that, okay, if people migrate to another country, that can have a lot of consequences for their feeling to belong. And this feeling to belong is an important aspect that we could work on or be very active in making them feeling to belong. So making them part of it. So being an inclusive society, that would be a good idea. Not only society, but also working groups, for example, working situation or communities try to be aware of that. Is that an answer to your question?
Yes. And I think we have time for one more, so I will give you one more question before we move on to the next presentation. So some societal factors co-occur, like in the same country, for example, poor living standards or low levels of trust in politicians. Have any study tried to take many different societal factors into account to see which one is more important?
Yeah, that's a very good. Yeah, that's a very good question. So I am aware of 2 studies who did this. One I was involved in, but the other was Svader and Moraro. And they use a technique, which is, I don't want to go into too much technical details, but it's quite a new approach derived from what is the word? People who study politics. I forgot the word. Sorry, but
Political science.
Political science, thank you. They use a combination of qualitative and quantitative research where they combine different potential explanations. But also there you are limited in a way, so you can't check maximum of 5, 6, 7 maybe different macro level explanations. But then it shows very interestingly that some factors are really very important, taking into account the other 4 or 5 that you have. So this helps you to disentangle or to unravel these macro level factors. And I'm sure there are other ways to do that, but I'm not aware of a study that really tried to disentangle these macro level influences. That's what we should do next.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Marja.
Welcome.
We now move on to the next presentation, and that's Stefan Fors, Associate Professor at the Aging Research Centre, and he also works at the Centre for Epidemiology and Community Medicine at Stockholm region. Very welcome, Stefan.
Thank you, Neda. Let me see if I can share my slides. I hope you can see my slides by now. So I will talk a little bit about loneliness and mental health and loneliness and depressive symptoms and depression in particular, because that's the mental health outcome that has been studied most in relation to loneliness. And for good reason, I will argue. But since I have limited amount of time, I thought I would start by saying what we do know with quite a lot of certainty, and then I will move on to the more complicated stuff and the more speculative stuff later on. But what we do know with a high degree of certainty is that loneliness and depression and depressive symptoms are associated. There is a strong, replicable, robust link between loneliness and depressive symptoms. At any given moment, people who report loneliness are also more likely to report depressive symptoms. This is true at any given time, but it's also true over time. So people who report loneliness today are more likely to develop depressive symptoms over time, and vice versa. People who report depressive symptoms are more likely to develop or report loneliness later on. So this we know. This replicates over studies. It's pretty robust adjustments. We know this pretty well. But if you've ever taken a class in statistics, you know that correlation does not imply causation. So the vast majority of studies are not designed in a way that we can draw the inference that loneliness caused depression and depressive symptoms. And I will try to explain why this is so complicated with this figure. So we have a situation where loneliness at time 1 is associated with depressive symptoms as time 2. So this is what we would expect to see if loneliness did indeed cause depressive symptoms. But it is also what we would expect to see under other conditions if there are shared risk factors for both loneliness and depressive symptoms. And we know that there are. So for example, we know that people who report loneliness today are more likely to have had a history of depressive symptoms than people who do not report loneliness. And people with a history of depressive symptoms are also more likely to develop depressive symptoms in the future. We know that people who have lost a partner or who may have become disabled over time, they have a higher risk of loneliness, but they also have a higher risk of depressive symptoms. So these are shared risk factors. There are also these types of shared risk factors on a genetic and personality level. So we know, for example, that social phobia, social anxiety increases the risk for both loneliness and depressive symptoms. In terms of personality, we know that neuroticism is a risk factor for both loneliness and depressive symptoms. People who are high on neuroticism are more likely to experience loneliness and depressive symptoms. And this is not so surprising. We know that one of the characteristics of neuroticism is to interpret situations negatively. So it's not so strange that you end up feeling more lonely or developing more depressive symptoms. But together, this means that it could be the case that there is no cause-effect association between loneliness and depressive symptoms. It could potentially all be explained by these shared risk factors. And as researcher, when we have a situation like this and we want to figure out whether there really is a cause-effect association, our best method is to run an experiment. This is what we would like to do ideally. We would randomize people into groups, and we would prescribe loneliness to one group and placebo to another group, and then we will follow them up, and then we will see the differences in depressive symptoms over time. This we cannot do, of course, for ethical and practical reasons. We cannot run experiments. We have to study this in the wild. And this is problematic because then we never know if all the right variables are in the model, or if there is some variable that we've missed that is not in our model, or some variable that we haven't measured good enough to be in the model. So we never really know whether we are estimating a causal effect or not. So what can we do then? Well, I said that the vast majority of studies on loneliness and depressive symptoms are not done in a way so that you can draw causal conclusions. But there are a few studies, not many, but a few studies that have at least tried to address this problem head on. And what they do typically is that they use real world data, but then they use study designs or statistical techniques that, under very strong assumption, mimics an experience or an experiment. So what they can say then is that if these assumptions hold true, then we can estimate whether there's a causal effect of loneliness on depressive symptoms or not. And as I said, there's very few studies like this, and they operate under different assumptions and with different study designs. So they have also come up with different results. Some of them have found evidence of a causal effect of loneliness on depressive symptoms, and some of them have not found evidence of such an effect. And to my knowledge, there have been no systematic review of these studies and no systematic evaluation of them. So if I just give you my impression of reading this literature, and where would I put my money? I think that if you read this literature of these quasi-experimental studies, they do in the end lean towards that loneliness can, at least under some conditions, cause depressive symptoms. So I think there is at least some tentative evidence that loneliness can cause depressive symptoms. And in the end, this is not so surprising, I think, because if you look at what loneliness feels like beyond the label loneliness, if you look at the qualitative evidence, so this is a figure from a meta-synthesis of all the qualitative evidence of how older people who report feeling loneliness, how they describe their feelings. And these are the themes that come up in those studies. So you can see that it's loss of meaningful interpersonal relationships, negative emotions, negative perceptions of the self, struggling to maintain the energy to endure, and this leads to a loss of a feeling of loss of meaning in life and feelings of emptiness. And when these researchers try to summarize this in a metaphor, they said that it feels like being trapped in an empty waiting room. And this does sound an awful lot like depressive symptoms, right? Negative emotions, negative perception of self, loss of energy, loss of meaning in life, emptiness. These are very close to the diagnostic criteria of clinical depression. So it really seems like loneliness and depression are quite closely related, and they do share symptomatology. So it's not strange that we find this association over time. But if we don't have the clear-cut evidence, then we don't have the clear-cut epidemiological evidence that loneliness causes depressive symptoms. Does that even matter? Should we care about that? I suggest that it depends on who you ask. If you ask me and my colleagues who work as researchers, yes, it matters. Our primary loyalty is to truth and knowledge. This is what we're paid to do. We shouldn't rest until we figured out exactly how this works, which might very well turn out to be never. If you ask policymakers, on the other hand, I think they could say that it sort of matters. I mean, you have to prioritize your resources, and sometimes you might have to prioritize maybe reducing the disease burden of psychiatric diseases, and that it's not clear that reducing loneliness will do that. Having said that, reducing loneliness will probably not do harm. Even if it doesn't reduce psychiatric diagnosis, it will probably make people feel better if you do it good enough. So the sort of cost of being wrong is not very high. You're probably doing a good thing if you're reducing loneliness. And then for everyone who's not a researcher or policymaker, or even for us who are researchers, policymakers all the time that we're not in that capacity, I don't think it really matters. I mean, loneliness is in itself a mental health problem. It reduces well-being, it doesn't feel good. So reducing loneliness is a valuable goal in its own right. So I think you shouldn't take this lack of clear evidence as an excuse to not call your mother tonight. Do it. You will feel better. She will feel better. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Very interesting presentation. I have some questions for you here. So what would be the evidence for the opposite, that depressive symptoms cause loneliness?
I think there's fairly good evidence for that as well. And we know, and this is a field I don't know as good, but I think there's good evidence that at least major depression and clinical depression, one of the characteristics is that you withdraw. You stay at home, you don't go out, you don't talk to people, you withdraw from social conditions, and that you can see how that would lead to loneliness. So I think there's a case to be made for that as well.
Yeah. Okay, so if you were to advise policymakers or practitioners, and we have many with us today, would you say that targeting loneliness or targeting depression would be the more effective way to improve people's lives?
I don't think that's a question that a researcher should answer. I think that's something we should decide democratically. But what I can say is I think currently we have better methods to reduce psychiatric diseases. We have more evidence of efficient treatments for that than we do have for loneliness. But that just goes to show that we need more research on developing good interventions for loneliness.
Yes, for sure. We also, since we have a closed chat, you can't unfortunately see the questions, and now we have a question and an answer in the chat. So the question was that about the relative differences in social interactions that might exist in a society. So say that I live in a context where I perceive that other people around me have much more social interaction than I do. And would that make me feel more lonely than if I lived in a society where I was equal to other people in social interactions? I have a question, I have an answer in the chat from Marja Aartsen, but Stefan, I would be happy to hear your answer as well after. So Marja says that this is a very good question. Yes, I'm quite sure that there is an influence from what is called relative deprivation. If you see that other people have a wide social network, many people visiting them that is higher than what you have, you might feel more lonely. This can also occur when using social media, as it often looks as if other people have a richer social network than you have. Would you agree with this, Stefan?
Yeah.
Putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, no, that's a very eloquent answer. I don't think I have anything to add.
The next presenter is Elisa Tiilikainen, professor at the University of Eastern Finland. Very welcome, Elisa. And we will now listen to her presentation.
Thank you. I will just share the slides. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I also want to thank the organizers for asking me to be a presenter in this webinar. Really interesting topic and nice presentations already. My name is Elisa Tiilikainen. I work as a professor of social work at the University of Eastern Finland. So greetings from Kuopio, Finland. And I promise to talk about a life course perspective on loneliness among older adults. And it is actually quite nicely linked to the previous presentations. So a few words about why this topic and why I'm the one talking about this. I have always been quite interested in how loneliness is embedded in the individual life courses of older adults and how loneliness changes during the life course. Already about 10 years ago, I did my PhD on the topic, which was a longitudinal qualitative study in which I interviewed and met older adults who experienced loneliness often or all the time, and I met them a few times during a 5-year period. And based on the study, I published one book called, it's the purple one here, Unshared Moments, Loneliness and Life Course, and also one article on narratives of long-term loneliness, in which I focused on 2 case studies from this larger PhD study. And also with Marja Aartsen, who has been here presenting, and a colleague from my university, Siiri Krav, we have published one article on early life circumstances and late life loneliness trajectories among Finnish older adults. So these studies provide kind of the standpoint for this presentation and my perspective to life course and loneliness. So the concept of time is often present in life course research, but interestingly, it often comes up also in loneliness research. And I've kind of been interested in what does it, what is the temporal nature of loneliness. And already in early research, psychologist Jeffrey Young made a distinction between the different types of temporalities in loneliness, dividing it into this transition, situational, and chronic forms of loneliness. And also later empirical research, both quantitative and qualitative, has shown that there is differences in the duration of loneliness and also in the ways how older adults step into loneliness and cope with loneliness during their life course. And in my own study, I found also that for some older adults, loneliness is a new experience faced in old age. And as for others, it might have been already present in previous life phases or sometimes very long-term throughout the life course. As Lena and also Marja mentioned, that loneliness is often understood as a negative and unpleasant emotional state, describing a mismatch between individuals' desires and expectations towards the social relationships and perceived reality. And in this kind of understanding of loneliness as this a person's individual perception of the current situation and social relations, you can see that the kind of different time horizons are also embedded in the actual experience. There was a good comment and discussion in the chat about this kind of comparison to others and other people's social relationships and situations, and you can see that loneliness is often it is embedded in the comparison to others, but also especially when talking about later life loneliness, it's also about comparison to past life situations and past experiences. So a person often kind of evaluates his or her current situation in related to the previous life history and previous life experiences there. Interestingly, also Deborah Morgan and Vanessa Burholt have in one of their study, they describe loneliness as this kind of biographical disruption, which is connected to the life course and also the temporalities of loneliness. And they described this as an event that affects one's perceptions of self and sense of worth and changes the way one is perceived by others. And they had examples of that for some older adults, loneliness was triggered by a single life event, such as bereavement, divorce, relocations, or as for others, it can be kind of an outcome of a series in later life. For example, retirement resulting from poor health and leading to loss of driving license, for example. So different type of kind of life events and life circumstances are often embedded in the individual experiences of loneliness. So what can be said about the life course framework? And there is in life course research, there are different perspectives that have been used, varying from this kind of personological to institutional life course paradigms. And my own research has been maybe a bit more embedded in kind of the individual life histories and the personological life course paradigm, but I have also been interested in the wider social context, as which was focused in Marja's presentation, and how that also impacts those individual life experiences and life histories of older adults. And we can talk about kind of, even though we don't have a single life course theory, but we can talk about rather a life meta theory of life course, and kind of the key idea behind that we cannot fully understand human experience examining them only through one stage of life, but we have to acknowledge that they are impacted by a collection of different events and circumstances, and this is highly important also, and especially when examining old age and later life. And if you think of social gerontology, the life course approach, it recognizes the diversity of older people through those kind of different life histories and different types of experiences that they have had, but also the collective nature of aging. And I think this is also linked to what Marja was presenting, kind of those wider societal factors that impact people's resources and opportunities to maintain and gain so meaningful social relations throughout their life course. So what does a life course approach offer then to loneliness research? And I think even though the kind of life course perspectives hasn't been used that much in loneliness research, but when you read research, both quantitative and qualitative, on loneliness, you can really find those elements of life course and life course perspective in them. And several studies have shown that loneliness in later life is often rooted in these kind of different life transitions, and such as bereavement, retirement, decline in health, and these are often kind of these life situations where everyday life and social relations change in a very critical way. And this is, of course, something that was referred to by Morgan and Berholt as the biographical disruption. So in my own research, older adults have described loneliness as an experience embedded in life course transitions, including also, for example, moving to another country and moving to another neighborhood. And for many, loneliness decreased after adapting to this new life situation. But I found that also for some, loneliness was a very continuing experience, and it was often rooted in those kind of earlier life experiences, and for even these kind of childhood circumstances, such as loss of mother in childhood or the impacts of wartime in previous life phases. And I think what is also interesting from the life course perspective, and this is something that has been already also in the previous presentation, kind of the life course perspective acknowledges and understands that the societal and cultural context has a significant role on why loneliness occurs and how it is perceived. And this comes from the kind of concepts of time and place, and this is interesting also what I've been thinking, and kind of that does the meanings of loneliness change for different cohorts? So not just the cultural context, what we have been discussing also in the previous presentations, but also what is the kind of influence of time, and is loneliness the same for cohorts that have been born in the 1920s compared to cohorts, for example, born in the 50s. So really trying to understand also the meanings and influences of time and place in the experience of loneliness. So just to sum up, what I kind of understand from my research and find that the life course approach is very important for the theoretical and conceptual understanding of loneliness, and I think it kind of not offers more understanding for research, but also when developing new kind of intervention strategies to alleviate loneliness. And what I found is the most important thing, that kind of when looking at loneliness from a life course perspective, it really reveals the diversity of those experiences and the differences, and not only just kind of dividing it to emotional or social or existing difficult word, loneliness, but also kind of understanding the different temporalities, that for some older adults it's a more long-term experience, and then the kind of interventions and ways of tackling it need to be different. And not for many, but there is a group of older adults for whom loneliness is a very enduring experience that may be impacted by also early life events and childhood circumstances. And also when looking at these kind of critical life transitions, I kind of find that different kind of narrative gerontology and narrative practices may offer new ways of alleviating long-term loneliness, as a way of kind of offering possibilities to restory one's own life and kind of support that sense of self and sense of worth in later life. However, this is something that there's not that I haven't found research or kind of interventions really utilizing these kind of narrative forms that much. So it would be really important and interesting thing for future research also. Yes, but this is kind of shortly my thoughts on the topic.
Thank you so much, Elisa. We have time for one question, so I will quickly ask you a question. So a life course perspective, as you have in your research, increases our understanding of loneliness in the individual. But how can we apply this knowledge in the here and now for older people to reduce loneliness?
Yeah, good question. I think it's kind of embedded in my last bullet point about this kind of narrative gerontology or narrative practices, which at least when doing qualitative research, I found that I was in the beginning interested in loneliness here and now, but when doing these kind of in-depth interviews, I found that it's actually the current experience was really closely or very tightly embedded in those past life histories, and the way the people, older adults, started talking about them, and felt that it was really important to kind of story their life and tell about their life, and kind of also maybe for them to get more understanding of the reasons behind loneliness. And I think that would be, and I know that there are some kind of interventions in which they kind of use these kind of life story approaches, but I think that could be useful, and also kind of having that opportunity for an older adult to share their life story. I think that is something that often when especially when you need kind of daily help and your health declines, and kind of sometimes older adults may feel that other people are not interested in who they are and what is their life story, and that could be a way of kind of alleviating loneliness in the current everyday life.
So connecting the life course to the here and now.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Elisa. Our next presenter is Magdalena Kania Lundholm, very welcome. You're an associate professor at Dalarna University, and this will be a very nice continuation of Elisa's presentation, actually.
Yes,
So,
indeed.
very welcome.
Thank you very much. So yes, thank you for the introduction as well, Neda. So I'm here to present some of the results from one of the projects that Lena mentioned at the very beginning, namely the project Causes of, and Actions of Late Life Loneliness. And in one of the work packages within that project, we looked specifically at older people's own accounts and experiences of loneliness in their everyday life, and also different ways what they do to alleviate loneliness. So we also departed from this very subjective experience of loneliness. And just want to acknowledge Jere Norlin as well, who will be talking after me, who was also who is a PhD candidate within that project, and who was also involved in that study. So just a few words on our method. So we conducted 16 face-to-face semi-structured interviews with persons that were aged 80 plus, so the oldest old, who have reported experiences of loneliness and who were living, it's also important to mention, in ordinary housing, so not in nursing homes. And the average age was a little bit above 86, and the majority of them were female and widowed. And this is also what Lena mentioned, that this is the group that reports the highest levels of loneliness. So the aim of this study was to explore, as I mentioned, how older adults themselves described and reflect on the everyday activities and practices and purposes as responses to their feelings of loneliness. And again, the focus was on their own reflections, their own meanings, and on those and the purposes on those activities in which they involved with when they feel lonely. So basically, we were interested in understanding and exploring what they do and why. And by daily activities and practices, we mean actions that older adults engage in on everyday basis in their everyday life, but that there are also those familiar and often taken for granted activities and even mundane actions, as well as leisure activities. But we also were interested in activities that refer to those more internal, reflective, or cognitive emotional processes, such as imagining, reframing, reminiscing. So not necessarily only what they do, but also the thinking practices, the reflections. And all of these daily activities and practices were embedded in the both physical and emotional fabric of older adults' lives, or their everyday lives. So there were two main research questions that were important for us. First, which everyday activities and practices do older adults engage in when they feel lonely? But also how they describe the meaning and purpose of these activities and practices in relation to their own experience of loneliness. So reporting the results, we conducted also a thematic analysis, and the two main thematic streams were, on the one hand, solitary activities, and on the other hand, more social activities. So when it comes to engaging in solitary activities and practices, we could distinguish at least four different types of activities. There were mentally stimulating activities, such as reading a book, for instance, or reading a newspaper, solving crosswords, everything that older adults reported as some things that motivate them to think, to kind of engage in this type of more mentally stimulating activities. Then we have distinguished also physically stimulating activities that have included moving your body, for instance, during gardening, but also going out for a walk. doing some sort of physical exercise. Then also partially connected, but a separate theme was household activities, specifically daily activities such as so mundane as cooking, baking, cleaning, also reported as activities that they often engage in when feeling lonely. Then we have media-based activities that we specifically also distinguished, such as watching TV, listening to the radio. And then the fifth one was the cognitive, what we call the cognitive emotional practices. Often when the feelings of loneliness arrive, so to speak, the goal was kind of to release the tension, to kind of handle that very feeling, for instance, by crying, or by reminiscing the past experiences, the past memories, thinking back. So here again, we see what Elisa was talking about, the life course perspective, looking back at their lives, previous events. And what we also distinguished were key purposes. So not only what those older adults engage in, but also why they do it. So among the key purposes was the sense of personal significance, the feeling that also some sort of autonomy or independence, the sense of continuity, again, could be connected to the life course perspective, doing things that I have previously done, or doing things the way I have previously done. Psychological relief, specifically can be connected to those cognitive emotional practices, just dealing with the emotion by yourself. And also purposes that are related to issues of companionship and distraction, looking for companionship, even when, or perhaps even specifically when being alone, or just looking for some sort of distraction. But what was also quite interesting, what we have found, was that same activity, such as, for example, watching TV, could serve also different purposes. So watching TV could be seen as both distraction, but also looking for companionship. So, for instance, as one of the participants said, because then you can disappear. If you find something to watch, then you're gone, maybe, and you get absorbed. Or as another participant mentioned, watching TV is distracting. Absolutely. It's when I think about whether I feel lonely, and I do feel very lonely, despite all this going on around me. So yeah, looking for distraction, looking for kind of killing that silence around you, by setting on TV. So there is some voices, some sounds around. Or for instance, as another participant mentioned, it's company. For example, when I eat dinner, I can sit in front of the TV, have the TV on, and watch it while I eat. Then there's someone talking the whole time. So again, looking for company, looking for sounds around, while doing also those mundane daily activities. And then another bigger theme was seeking and sustaining social interaction. So opposite to those engaging in solitary activities was, for instance, for those who had that chance or opportunity, was calling friends and family. Here again, the purpose was personal significance, sense of autonomy, and also recognition. But again, also continuity, doing things as they previously were, maintaining contact with those who are still with us, so to speak, and also obviously companionship. Then we have distinguished also activities that were focusing specifically on seeking social interaction outside of home, that were also often for the purposes of maintaining some sort of autonomy, personal significance, and again, looking for companionship, even as such a simple as going out for a walk, hoping to meet some neighbors, hoping to meet some people on the street, perhaps, hopefully, engaging in some small talk. And then again, what was also interesting that on the contrary, different activities, engaging in different activities could potentially also serve same purpose. For example, reading a book, having a phone call with or meeting others can be providers of companionship. So as one interviewee mentioned, I read quite a lot. It keeps me company. It expands the horizons. So one could also say that this activity is also for stimulating kind of your mind, your brain, but also keeping company. As another participant mentioned, it can be something as simple as a phone call to a friend. Again, for the purpose of companionship, for the purpose of kind of maintaining that social contact. And here is we put together all those thematic activities in different themes. As you can see, they're all overall we have distinguished 7 different activities and practices and 5 different purposes. And this is more of a visual representation of that thematic structure of our analysis. And basically the main finding would be that they're connected also to different activities can be connected to different purposes, but also again same activity can have different purposes. And it's probably not very surprising that people who report feelings of loneliness are also engaging in more solitary activities than social activities. Some of the take-home lessons, so to speak. So clearly from this study, we could see that those mundane daily activities are very meaningful when dealing with loneliness, when responding to loneliness. These activities are very meaningful source of sense of continuity, but also personal significance. Again, something that can be related to previous theoretical understandings, such as continuity theory of aging, but also life course perspectives. The repetition of routines is also, for those older people, a way of organizing time, preserving sense of coherence, a way of safeguarding autonomy, dignity, and sense of self, doing things as I have previously done, as I've always done, as some of our participants reported. Then it's also quite interesting that many of these activities, as you could see, they're casual leisure activities. They're not any big events like that happen once in a while, like going out to a concert or celebrating something. These are very casual activities, mundane daily activities that are also very important sources for daily distraction or keeping companionship. And again, something that has been previously mentioned in previous research is also the importance of home as a safe space. And what we could see in our material is not necessarily home as one specific particular point, geographical point, but also that it's the inside, in between, and outside activities around home that are providing that sense of agency. So it's something that lonely older people do while being at home, but also going outside, or for instance, maintaining activities around home, like going for shorter walks or gardening, and so on. And also, what is quite important to mention here is that, as you can see, it kind of goes maybe against the stereotypical idea of a lonely person perhaps sitting or staring into the wall, that older people who report loneliness, they are not passive. They're actually responding to their feelings of loneliness in very different ways. And from that, one could say that also the problem could arrive when the continuity of those activities being disturbed. It could be disturbed, for instance, by such things like hinders in their hinder their mobility, for instance. Health issues arise, or for instance, when there is lack of public transportation during weekends. These are also quite important to take into account because they disrupt that continuity that so to speak keeps them going. And I just want to say that there is also, based on that material, we have still some work in progress. One is conducted by Sebastian Lindhagen, who's also a PhD student in another project that Lena is leading, and he specifically looks at ways how older adults express their experience of loneliness, and specifically at what kind of language they use. And the goal of that study is particularly further on to develop instruments for measuring loneliness that can be used in care settings. And also we have another paper based on that material where we want to also apply a more sociological perspective, because the majority of studies focusing on qualitative studies focusing on the micro perspective are usually using psychological perspective. So this is the work that is still in progress. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Magdalena, for this very interesting presentation. And it will be interesting also to read your upcoming work. We will go straight to Jeri's presentation to keep the time frame, so I'm sorry about that. Our next presenter is Jeri Norlin, who has also been involved in the study that Magdalena presented. Jeri is a PhD student at Dalarna University. Very welcome, Jeri. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Now, so thank you for having me. It's really great to have the opportunity to present my research at the Nordic Welfare Centre today. And as you can see, I will present the study Unpacking Interventions to Reduce Loneliness. And here the aim of this study is to deepen the understanding of interventions aimed at reducing loneliness in older adults by unpacking some of their key components. And don't worry, I will try to describe what I mean with this soon. But more specifically, it examines which intervention components are regarded by experts from both the public sector and the civil society as contributing in reducing loneliness, and whether these vary depending on the type of loneliness being targeted. So the rationale for the study is that there is much research done on interventions and how well it works to reduce loneliness. But these type of studies is often laden with methodological difficulties, and much intervention research are engaged with interventions that are already developed and implemented with a focus on what interventions that are delivered and if they are associated with reduced loneliness. However, they seldom reports on what it is within the interventions that contribute to their success in reducing it. And therefore we thought that more research is therefore needed to delve deeper into the whys of the interventions, or what elements within the interventions that contributes to their success. And in this present study, we call these types of elements the components of interventions. So try to pinpoint what do we mean with this components of interventions. And I'm trying to give this car metaphor. I hope it works out well. Let me know in the chat. But I like to think about it in terms of a car. Let's say that the purpose of the car is to be able to drive, okay? To make a journey somewhere where you feel better. Let's say you want to visit a friend. In relation to loneliness, the intervention is the car. It is a vehicle that can drive you to your friend, thus potentially making the journey better in that you experience less loneliness. Of course, you need a whole car to be able to drive, but almost all somewhat functioning cars can take you on a journey. But what is the main function that really needs to work for a car to be able to drive? What drivers makes the car function and move? Well, the motor or the engine. And if we want to understand what makes us able to drive the car, we would look under the hood to see which part of the motor that contributes to what makes the car able to drive. Well, for the most part, all parts are necessary to get it moving. But let's say that we could assess that some parts are more contributing than others. What would be the key functions or elements of the motor that is needed to be able to make the car move? The different parts of the motor are the different components of the intervention. I hope it works out. So you can think about it like the motor are made up of 4 different key areas. For example, the power system, the fuel system, ignition system, and cooling system. And each area are important. We need to have them all to make the car work. We conceptualize that interventions are functioning somewhat the same, that we need different key areas of interventions, all contributing to the overall functioning and success of the intervention. And in our study, the 4 key areas that we used were the purpose and focus of the intervention, the main aim. What is the main aim of the intervention? The design of the intervention. How is the intervention structured and delivered? The content. What activities is included in the intervention, as well as the leadership and organization. How is the organization or the intervention managed and led? And these are the components that were included in the study. You see, these are plenty. There are 35 in total, and I won't mention everyone now, but they're grouped into these 4 key areas. And all of these components were derived from previous research literature, mainly intervention studies, where we scanned a lot of intervention studies, tried to extract what type of, or all the components we could find, as well as from workshop with a stakeholder reference group representing the target experts of the study, the public sector and the civil society. So we do want to exhaust that these are not exhaustive. There may very well be additional components out there that play an important role. Thus, we need more research for this. Before I give a brief reporting of the findings, I just give a short description of the method used, as the main focus of the study was to try to pinpoint which components that are regarded as contributing in reducing loneliness, not only in general, but also across the 3 different types that Lena described in the beginning of the seminar. That is social, emotional, and existential loneliness. And by using a 2-round Delphi design, that is a questionnaire design with 2 consecutive rounds for data collection, we asked in total 48 experts from both the public sector and civil society to rank the 35 components based on how well they view them to contribute in reducing different types of loneliness. And they ranked them from 1 to 4, from the most contributing to the 4th most contributing. And we constructed 3 vignettes to try to pinpoint what are the types of loneliness. And all these were drawn from interviews with older adults and illustrated these different types. And the expert assessed which intervention components that best addressed each type of loneliness. So we asked them also to in the 2nd round to revise their opinion. So they first gave a first opinion in the 1st round, and then they could revise them in the 2nd round to try to get more of a consensus and try to give them something that they can think of in terms of reasonings from the last round. So why someone picked a specific component in the 1st round. So there are a lot of results, and I will go through all 4 key areas of intervention and give some results on which of the components that were regarded by the expert as most contributing. And what I will describe is the component that scored the highest total selection from all 40 experts in round 2 across the 3 different types of loneliness. So I will not delve deep into which was the 1st rank of all. That will be further explained in the paper. But we can see that in regard to the aim of the interventions, improve well-being and mental health and develop new interests were regarded as important to combat all types of loneliness. And for social loneliness, we also saw that improved physical health were important. For emotional loneliness, the change in social situation as an aim was important. And for existential loneliness, a sense of having achieved something was also important. Regarding how the intervention is designed, there was 3 of this, the same three components came out as the most contributing from our experts. It was carried out regularly, continuity over time, and opportunity to meet new people, all of which were regarded as contributing in reducing all types of loneliness. And for the content of interventions, what it includes, we saw that for all types of loneliness, creates a sense of belonging, and conversations about thoughts and feelings were important to alleviate all types of loneliness. And for social loneliness, informal socializing, such as having a fika or a coffee break, was important. And for emotional and existential loneliness, the content of providing opportunity to be meaningful to others were also expressed as important. And the last area about leadership, we saw that for all types of loneliness, it was important that the leader has relevant competence and strong commitment within the interventions. And for social and emotional loneliness, if the intervention were organized so that it was the same people there each time, it was also regarded as good for the social and emotional loneliness. For social and existential loneliness, it was also important that the leader had respect for integrity when delivering the intervention. And for emotional loneliness, we also saw that if the leader had relevant life experience, it was also regarded as contributing in reducing loneliness. Yeah, so that was a quick resume of the results. But to conclude, certain components appear important across all types of loneliness, while other matter for specific types. So it is important to look at different types of loneliness when conductive interventions. When designing and researching intervention, it is therefore crucial to consider what type is targeted. And in terms of policy and practice, both the component list with the 35 different intervention components and results of the important of matching the components with specific types of loneliness could offer concrete guidance for local practice in how to evaluate and improve interventions. This is only a first step in identifying the role of components within interventions, and further intervention studies are needed to evaluate them more thoroughly. Our study has begun to unpack the interventions for loneliness, highlighting components that seem effective, and these results serve as an invitation for both researchers and practitioners to make use of them. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jerry. This is indeed very important research and a way to move the intervention side forward. I have one quick question for you before the break. Do you think that there are cultural differences in what components that are important for effective interventions, or are the components that you have identified, are they universal across countries and cultures?
Yeah, a very good question. And my spontaneous answer would be yes, there might be some differences. I'm thinking about what Marja Aartsen talked about in her presentation, that we can see in research that there are differences, cultural differences and regional differences, and also in terms of welfare regimes differences on the experience of loneliness and prevalence of loneliness. And I would think that if we have delivered different type of interventions, I mean, if there are diversity in experience of loneliness, I do also think that the components within those interventions might also vary. So I do think that it is very important to keep on researching cultural differences in terms of interventions and interventions components as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your attention during this second part of the webinar. Welcome back. Hope you're excited about the Menti that we're gonna do now. So I want you to get your phones if you don't already have your phone, or use your iPad or computer. If you have your phone, you can scan this QR code and you get straight into this Menti. Otherwise, you go to menti.com and then you use the code that is up on this page. So 1960 6343. And what we want to know first is what you have heard today that was new or surprising to you. And I think that in this Menti, you can actually write several answers. So if several things were new to you, please put them in different boxes, because then we will, with the help of AI, group these answers that you give to see, to get a more of an overview. So I'll give you a few minutes to give some answers. Very nice. I can see that we have 40 people in the Menti right now giving answers. Thank you so much. And now that we have all these answers, I think that I can actually start grouping them. I should have said also Norwegian, Finnish, Danish, whatever language you like, because AI is smart and can still decipher what we mean. So the loneliness paradox is a new thing, and that's, I think, talking about the paradox is always fascinating. So that could be a thing for us researchers to remember when we're talking about it. And the different forms of loneliness, for sure, as the presenters have also said, if the interventions should target different perspectives if we're targeting different kinds of loneliness, that is, of course, also very important to remember. Home as a safe space, the life course perspective in loneliness research. As a life course researcher, I would say that's very important. Unfortunately, we lack the data to a large extent to be able to study loneliness over the life course with most data sets. But increasingly, I think data are being collected that will allow this kind of questions regarding life course also with quantitative data. Now I can't see what it says there under the QR code, but I think it's geographical differences, which would then also go into the loneliness paradox. Very nice. Thank you so much. This will be good for us to take with us in our continued work. Now let's move on to the second question. And now we want to know what you learned today that you will take with you going back to your continued work. So what will you apply or share in your organization when you go back? So we have here the life course. Before the AI summary, we have the life course perspective and several answers. That's something to take with you back in your future work or research. The importance of meeting places in the community. How to work with interventions and different types of loneliness in interventions. New theories and models that can be included in research applications. That's also very nice. Thanks for sharing all these insights. Let's see what AI can do for us. So AI says that what you will take with you back to your continued work is intervention design, life course. Unfortunately, I can't read this one. The importance of community spaces. Peer support was hidden. Mental health, cultural differences. Oh. This QR code was actually a bit disruptive. Kanya. Oh. Type distinctions. Yeah, so loneliness as short-term or long-term or situational. So thank you so much, everyone. We will take this information with us in our continued work to know what is new, what we should maybe spread more in media. Nice. Now we continue with the program. So this last part of the webinar consists of one presentation and two reflections with take-home messages to civil society and social and healthcare services. So we start with Berit Rafoss, who's a project leader at Centret for ett Age-friendly Norway, my Norwegian there, the Center for an Age-friendly Norway. So please, Berit.
So can
there you are. Now we see you.
Good. I was shut out for a while there. So first of all, I just have to say this has been an excellent webinar so far. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for inviting me. I will, I guess, be more of the practitioner in all of this. I work for the Centre of an Age-friendly Norway, which is part of the Norwegian Directorate of Health. We are also an affiliate of the WHO Global Network of Age-friendly Cities and Communities. I have actually worked on the age-friendly agenda now for 12 years, and I'm still very enthusiastic and really enjoying this way of working, thinking, and preparing for a future with an aging population by working across sectors, focusing on co-creation with older people, and creating inclusive and accessible cities and communities. And I think it's been well demonstrated through the different reports and research that's been shown today that, for example, meeting places and different kinds of initiatives that we work in really help. And age-friendly cities is a tool also to reduce loneliness. Next slide, please. So the age-friendly development started back in 2007 when the WHO saw two mega trends, urbanization and demographic changes. So they gathered member states, older people, organizations, and researchers, asking the questions of what actually impacts quality of life and health in 60 plus. They managed to then decide upon these 8 domains. And this is actually the backdrop. This is the framework for the age-friendly development and for the global network. And the global network now counts around 1,700 members, covering 350 million people all over the world, and it's continuing to grow. Next. Now, age-friendly cities and the age-friendly approach, we need to work at different levels. At the individual level, enabling the participation and contribution of older people in society. But we also need to work at the systemic level, really creating policies, enabling initiatives, creating awareness within communities, organizations, and businesses. Next. Now, this quote from the Canadian researcher Glenn Miller really sums up some of the focus that we're trying to shift with the age-friendly development. He is of the opinion that so far the focus on urban and municipal development and design has really been on the young and thus often excluding the old. He feels that if we turn it around, it creates a more inclusive society for everyone. And no surprise, of course, we agree with that, and that we use as much as we can this quote and his research. Next. So as a community and individual, in order to prepare for the fact that we live longer and have more years, we need to ask some important questions. Some national programs use these questions as a starting point, and it really emphasizes the need for collaboration across sectors and how we enable inclusive society and trying to reduce social isolation and loneliness, and try to get the local knowledge of the needs and wishes of older people. So how can we become an age-friendly society? How are we going to collaborate? And then to the personal level, what kind of local environment would you like to grow in? What's important to you? And what are you going to do now with the extra time that you get? Next. So if you remember the 8 domains, the domains of transport, housing, social inclusion, through meeting places and activities, accessible spaces, are perhaps those that contribute the most to reducing loneliness. For example, within housing, if we look at existing housing, we try to focus very much on the adjacent outdoor areas that can enable the informal meetings, the social and physical activities. Housing associations, owners, residents will often make use of both indoor and outdoor common areas for low threshold activities anyone and everyone can take part in. They can be activities for certain age groups and certain interests, but also across generations. We see more and more of that. Of course, in developing new housing models, more social housing, using the gaining by sharing approach, where you create housing models with perhaps smaller spaces for your personal flat, but you share more indoor and outdoor spaces that are inclusive and communal. So residents then maybe share the costs, tasks and maintenance, as well as the responsibilities for these spaces, creating different activities. And the focus is on having enough activities and spaces to be together, but also having the option to retreat if you so wish. Coming more and more this sort of solutions, it's not for everyone, but the feedback and insights so far is very good, that both couples, widows, widowers, and singles alike really enjoy this new housing model. Now, transport, that is a challenge both in cities and rural areas. In the cities, you have different modes of transport, but they're not always very accessible or user-friendly, and they focus mostly just on getting people to and from work. And in more rural areas, there simply aren't many options other than the personal cars. And in co-creation with older people, the need for more accessible and flexible transport is clearly expressed. So it's very interesting and encouraging to see that through the recent years, we see more and more different examples of different transport models being developed. You have some of the minibuses that are on demand. You can call them, you can book them via an app, they take you from A to B. Drivers receive more special training, is more aware of the needs, can help you a little bit, more flexibility. Some try and go into partnership with the local taxi and organize senior taxi. In short, there's more and more flexible models being developed so as to cater for older people, but also younger people getting to and from outside of your regular public transport. Because the point being, it doesn't help with a lot of activities in the cities and communities if you can't get there and take part in them. In Oslo, when we developed the age-friendly transport there, the actual buses in themselves became a meeting place. Older people reported on making new friends, riding the bus also actually as a social activity, not necessarily having to go anywhere or having any errands, but they used the bus as a social meeting place. And speaking of meeting places, that is so important when developing, redesigning urban and municipal centers. You need benches, you need open spaces, vegetation, lighting, access to toilets, activities. And activities don't have to be very complicated. They can be having a nice view or maybe some posters and signage, creating a history around you of the area or the history that of things that have happened in that area before. But something that makes you want to seek out these places and that you're welcome, both to seek out company if you want, but also to be on your own. Maybe you can have some chatty benches where you have questions, opening up for more social interaction. Next. So regarding meeting places, some of the most important aspects are accessibility and having a welcoming atmosphere and safety. But you also need to think about the all year round perspective. Certainly in this part of the world, we know that the winter is a great challenge. You have the snow and the ice, and loneliness and social isolation can be greater in the winter months. So it's important to think about when you create the spaces that you have the all-round, all-year perspective. Now, back in 2013, when I started working on the age-friendly agenda, and ever since, older people have impressed upon me that there are two things that are important for us in order to get out and about, especially in outdoor areas, but also indoor. And it's enough seating and access to toilets. Also, they highlight that it's necessary to have enough information about the different meeting places and activities, and that you cannot rely on digital information alone. You also need to go old school and have the analog way of finding out about activities. You need to focus on having transport access to and from, also reflecting the diversity in society in terms of the different activities that you have. Inclusiveness, but also across generations. It's more and more, we see that cities and communities want to try and do things across generations. My own municipality, for example, which is a small rural community, they had to, for financial reason, actually share the space between the senior centre and the youth club. Now they had separate activities, but now they're planning more and more joint activities. I really like this way of thinking. And for the last 4 years, we have organized generation games, which is exactly as you may think, activities across generations. Low threshold, they're usually centrally located, they're free of charge, and volunteers, local businesses, organizations organize these events, and anyone can join. And because it's about games and physical activities, you don't really need a lot of language, it's intuitive. So we see that refugees and people with different cultural backgrounds will also join. Activity parks. More and more cities and communities now try and maybe focus on activity parks for all generations. We've had a lot of focus on playgrounds for children, but it's been also broadened to have green spaces, pockets, parks with benches, exercise equipment for all ages, and again, all year round. Next. So in 2022 to 24, we focused on outdoor spaces and meeting places. And this was very much acting on feedback from older people saying that the pandemic really showed them that we need more of these spaces and meeting places. So what we did was put out a call nationally for good examples. We had a lot of really good examples. So we created 4 different webinars, all highlighting good examples. And we created this handbook as well, which is full of inspiration. This is available in Norwegian and English, and please contact me if you're interested in looking at this. All the webinars that we do, we also have recordings of, and there are some great examples. Now we've literally moved inside. So now we're looking at inside meeting places. And we've had a call out, and so far we have 90 good examples from all over the country. Again, focusing on inclusiveness, accessibility, and diversity. So we will create a series of webinars focusing on indoor meeting places. Now, we are aware that meeting places in and of themselves are not enough. There are so many other underlying causes. But I do still think that it's one of the most important and visible and tangible things that a city or community can do in order to combat loneliness. Next. So at the heart of age-friendly development is involving and co-creation with older people. This is the way where you can map the local needs and wishes and truly create activities, transport solutions, housing spaces, meeting spaces, reflecting the local needs. I usually say it's one of the most important investments that a municipality can make. Next. And there are so many different ways of doing it. And on a day-to-day basis, this is probably one of the activities that we're mostly involved in together with the cities and communities. We help them organize the big events where they invite a lot of people, but also creating the more smaller, intimate events, maybe with some food, maybe with a workshop with a topic, but still answering and tackling challenges and getting that local input. We also encourage a lot of community outreach because for the meetings, different events that you invite in, it's very often the usual suspect. So you need to do a lot of outreach also to get all the different voices. We map out outdoor areas, do walkability audits, try and look at what meeting places do we have, are they accessible, what do we need? And also a lot of the cities and communities send out surveys and questionnaires. And in these, some ask directly about loneliness, but most of them don't because because of the stigma attached to loneliness and responding to questions about loneliness, they tend to rather ask about participation. Do you participate in different activities? Do you have anyone to ask if you want to take part in something? And so more and more insight shows us that loneliness is definitely a growing challenge. And for us, it also creates a motivation to really develop more and more inclusive and accessible cities and communities that are age-friendly. And as a result of being more age-friendly and inclusive, we feel and think, and from the feedback that we get so far in our development, that they do help in combat loneliness and social isolation. It's not enough in itself, much more is needed, but I think it's one of the most important tools. And the last slide is just our contact details, our website, our social media. We do have a little bit of information in English, but it's mostly Norwegian. But there's a lot of reports, handbooks, and an example database full of inspiration. I think that's it for me. Open to any questions if you might have them.
Thank you so much, Anne-Berit. Very interesting to get the environmental perspective as well. I have one question, or I have actually two questions for you. So it's so important that you include users and the local perspective in the development process here. But how do you balance the needs and wishes from the participants in the co-creation with the scientific evidence?
Ooh, I'm not sure we do balance it at the moment. I think what we try and do is really increase co-creation for the purpose of co-creating more and more. So at least you get hold of the local knowledge so that policies can be developed based on the needs and wishes of the local population. Then, of course, citizens and communities do research into public health or the general state of health or quality of life in their society, and they combine it. But from our perspective, one of our sort of motivations or objectives is really also just to increase co-creation, because up until maybe just 5 years ago, cities and communities were a bit reluctant. They were dreading creating this expectation gap between, what they can actually deliver and what people want. And they were also a bit skeptical of criticism. So I think for our part, it's been a focus so far on really increasing co-creation. I wish I could tell you we were balancing it more, but no. Having to be honest here.
Yeah. Thank you. And related to this is a comment in the chat that says, I'm not entirely sure that creating meeting spaces, which you talked about, is a real solution to loneliness, since what really matters is not being around more people, but the meaning that those people that are around us have for us. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I have to base this on my experience. So I've worked on this agenda for 12 years. I think I can safely say of all the presentations and meetings, town hall meetings, workshops I've taken part in, I've probably met between 3,000 or 4,000 older people all through these years. And I disagree. What they're telling us through the surveys, through the workshops, through our dialogue with them, through working with councils for senior people, is that meeting places are probably one of the most important tools. Like I said, it's not the only solution, but definitely one of the most important tools.
Which is super interesting that you find this. Thank you so much, Anne-Berit.
My pleasure.
This was our last presentation. Now we have 2 reflections and take-home messages to civil society and to social and health services. And we start with Louise Söderberg from the Swedish Association of Senior Citizens, SPF, who will give us the take-home message for civil society.
So, do you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for an interesting and important webinar. Thank you also for inviting me to represent civil society through Swedish Federation of Senior Persons, SPF. I'm a senior person too. We are a non-profit organization and have approximately 250,000 members throughout Sweden. Our purpose is to offer social activities, create togetherness, and provide advocacy. In doing so, we prevent and counteract loneliness among elderly people. SPF is a strong voice for older persons in Sweden. We influence politicians and decision makers on issues such as housing, healthcare, and economy policy. We are independent of political parties and religious communities. We work together with municipalities, other organizations, and the wider civil society. We work for the benefit of elders' health and quality of life and welcome research concerning these areas. My reflections on today's webinar and the message I will bring home and spread in our organization and to our members is primarily the research that is currently underway is very welcome and positive. You're confirming that we humans are different and continue to be so and grow also as elders. We are programmed to live and have this ability despite changes and difficult life events. The alarmistic image of loneliness among the elderly and in society is not correct. Involuntary loneliness primarily affects very old women with risk factors after the age of 85. You are helping to nuance the negative image of the elderly as vulnerable, weak, and lonely. This is a risk that it's a risk that this will be normalized. Between 65 and 95 is 30 years. It's not possible to generalize this group as homogeneous and to lump all elderly people together. Looking at people through a lifelong perspective, influenced by their previous experiences and the environment and context in which they have lived and are living, is a theme of this day. Those who have lived alone their entire lives experience loneliness in one way, and those who have become lonely in another. The demands of being social can be difficult for many people. I often hear that people like to be in smaller settings with few but close friends. People become more picky with age and often seeks a contemplative and relaxing solitude. The late Lars Tornstam, professor of social work, has an interesting theory of gerotranscendence and confirms that we later in life gain other perspective on ourselves and our surroundings. It is very important to take it into account that lifelong perspective is something we have to have in meeting our members. It is important to highlight that there are different kinds of loneliness. The one easiest to do something about and the one that society focused on the most is social loneliness. It is also the easiest for the individual to do something about themselves. Civil society and its interests organizations play an extremely important role for lonely people. To create and maintain close relationship is more difficult. Many people have the experience to live without a partner and family for their entire life. Others may have experience of bullying and exclusion for various reasons. They do not trust other people and withdraw from others. Their door has been closed. Our greatest challenge is to understand and reach them. Most of us will lose our partner, our friends, and our physical functions late in life. This is the most prominent risk factor for involuntary loneliness. We need to take more responsibility and care for each other and trust the society, the care and welfare, and notice this, and that they notice this and can make a difference for us. The existential loneliness that we encounter later in life is difficult to overcome. We need to meet other people and to find places for conversations, to be listened to and to share thoughts and concerns. The importance of directing efforts and responsibility specific for what kind of loneliness it is, like you says, is the next step forward. Community planning, healthcare, and elderly care have important development challenges. We need age-friendly cities, places available to everyone. We in SPF can work for this. One reflection is that in the past, people often meet in the courtyards of houses. Today, everyone sits on their own balcony, maybe even in a glass enclosed one. We need to develop dignified elderly care with trained personnel. Who can meet elderly people who experience loneliness. Time for conversation is crucial. This is another important political challenge for us. An important contribution to increased understanding of loneliness is the connection with depression. It's very important to deepen research in this area. It's not natural to be depressed because you are old, but there is a kind of acceptance of that assumption. Being old can't be that fun, and soon you will die. We know that if you get support in different ways to feel good mentally, you can have a good quality of life for the rest of your life. The treatment for depression should not only be medication, elderly people should also be offered therapy. Also interesting but difficult to compare is the loneliness of elderly in different countries, the loneliness paradox. The situation of elderly and, more important, the economy and cultural situation greatly between countries. There is an idealized picture that is so much better to grow old in a Mediterranean countries. It has almost become a truth. Another prejudice is that we are very lonely in Sweden. We have many single person households, but that is not synonymous with feeling lonely. In our country, we can afford to live alone and still have a rich social life. We live in an individualistic time. We are supposed to be independent and take care of ourselves only. This make people lonely and disconnect from each other. One of you said that we are interconnected, and I will say that's true. People have more that unite us than separate us. We need to include in other people with different background and culture backgrounds in our meeting places and organization. For us, today's webinar is a confirmation that civil society plays an important role that complements the rest of society for many older people with the togetherness and social activities we offer. It can be of a vital importance to have a connection in, for example, a senior association. We offer a lot of activities, meeting, pub events, ball play, even life story groups. Our experience is that the need to come together to talk about life, to remember and reflect is great. Something that was also highlighted today. We are on the right track. So thank you very much for this webinar, and let's continue to work for a life worth living for everyone.
Thank you so much, Marie-Louise. Very valuable to get some insights from the civil society side. So thank you for that. We move on to Emma Lindgren from the local authorities of Kristianstad, who will give some reflections and take-home messages from the social and healthcare side. Please.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me come here today. I would also like to extend my thanks to all today's speakers for sharing your work with us. It was very interesting and inspiring. My name is Emma Lindgren, and I represent the Department of Social Care at Kristianstad Municipality. We are located in the southern of Sweden, in the region of Scania. We are a mid-sized municipality with about 79,000 inhabitants. In my role as a project leader, I'm a part of an innovation team that focuses on initiatives and projects to prevent and tackle loneliness among older adults who uses our services. We also work to build knowledge and competence among staff who interact with this target group on a daily basis. What stands out listening to all the speakers today is the complexity of this challenge we are facing. For example, in our line of work, we often focus on finding practical solutions fast. That can sometimes lead to seeing loneliness as yet another challenge, a separate issue next to other challenges older adults face, such as decline in physical health or falls or depression. That's why here in Kristianstad, we work to bring different professions together to better understand this complexity and to collaborate to reduce involuntary loneliness. We have mentioned the different types of loneliness today. We see that usually many solutions created by municipalities tend to target the social loneliness. Even some governmental funds tend to favor solutions that focus on creating new social and community spaces, just like Marie-Louise said. However, we must not forget the other types, such as the emotional and existential loneliness when creating new solutions and new tools to reduce the loneliness. In the introduction, we mentioned the lack of evidence, and here we also need to be better in considering how we evaluate different initiatives in the municipalities, preferably before we even deploy them into the social care. That is also something we think research can support us with. In Marja's presentation, she highlighted how loneliness depends on several factors at different levels and talked about the wider society. As a municipality, we navigate this challenge in collaboration with a wide range of actors. There's national, regional authorities, the non-governmental sector, private companies, and so on. So moving forward, we need to think about ways of how we practically can bring this collaboration together, using existing structures of collaboration or perhaps starting new ones. The link between mental health and loneliness that Stefan talked about is interesting, and also how it can mean different for different groups. In practice, the causality is hard to determine in the context of the daily interactions with clients. What we see, however, is that social care staff often notice this interplay and encounter situations where they wonder what is driving a client's behavior. However, they might not always have the tools or training to act on these. So there is a need to improve the knowledge about involuntary loneliness, maybe in relation to mental health, to the social care staff, as well as to give them accessible tools and work methods. Another important insight comes from Magdalena and Jerry's research of older people's experience of loneliness. The findings are relevant to us, as our goal is not only to create services and support for those experiencing loneliness, but also to empower individuals to develop their own coping strategies. We have also in our internal service seen that older clients who struggle with loneliness often relies on less effective coping mechanisms compared to those who report lower levels of loneliness. We are currently exploring how to incorporate the concept of meaningfulness into our assessments of older adults' daily routines. And we think this is an area that needs more focus. In our organization, we have identified professional competence in the role of occupational therapists who has this type of knowledge with them from their education. And this we think is an area to continue exploring. Elisa's presentation raised question of how we can better implement the life course approach in understanding loneliness. In social care, we have tools like life narratives. In Swedish, they called levnadsberättelser, and they are usually used in care homes, but the quality and the frequency of their use isn't always optimal, and we have to still rely on information from relatives and friends. So this is an area of development, and we also see the need to introduce these tools earlier, for example, in the home care. For the municipalities, I think it's a great value to learn more about the components in interventions presented by Jerry. We can use it to understand our current interventions, but also keep them in mind when generating new ideas and developing new interventions. In practice, the challenge is that not all components are handled by same person or same unit, and it might depend on multiple people and multiple services. So beside the external actors, we also need to work internally in the organizations and use the knowledge of different roles. I would also like to mention that Kristianstad municipality have started our work on becoming an age-friendly municipality or city. Our clients are here an important group, and we have to consider them often have reduced mobility or other needs that make it more difficult for them to join different activities. Recently, we completed a study looking at sound environments during social activities, and we can see that those with hearing impairments report greater struggles in being part of conversations and larger group activities. So we need to have the target group needs in mind when we continue our work of reducing involuntary loneliness. Here, research can help us identifying important components and subgroups and how to address them by adjusting activities or interventions to promote equity in social health. So there are many aspects to be considered, and I think we're back again to the complexity of this challenge. But together we can go forward. And finally, I just want to thank the organizers to today's webinar for bringing us together to share our views and to learn from each other, helping us forward in this shared challenge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma, for sharing these reflections from the social and healthcare side.
Thank you. And I would like to thank all the speakers for really interesting and nice and clear presentations and reflections. And I would like to thank Neda for a nice moderation of this webinar. I would like to thank all of you who've been listening. I hope you get as many insights and ideas as we have and be able to bring them back to your organizations. Finally, I would like to thank Louise and the Nordic Welfare Centre for this great opportunity to present the research from our project and more broadly as well.
Well, I can just echo the thank yous then, both to all you presenters, to all you participants who have been with us here. I think we have gotten a lot to think about, especially with this beautiful combination of both research and insights from practice. So this is definitely a lot to take away from here. A big thank you to also you two as co-organizers and the moderation, all 3 hours going strong. Very good, keeping time. As I mentioned in the beginning, the recordings will be available on the YouTube channel of the Nordic Welfare Centre. We may need a bit of time to have it subtitled, but then it will stay there. So you can revisit at any time. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you.